Hello and welcome, and I'm your host Konstantin Kogan, and we're here at Holistic Investments, and I'm here with David Johnston, who is a person who I met, multiple times in different conferences. He's a co-contributor to Morpheus. He's been in the space for 13 years, has incredible achievements, and really excited to have you here, David.
Awesome. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I was excited because I knew you when you were still like in the times of, multi-coin capital and Yeoman capital, like before that. So you were mostly on an investment side, right? But I know that the inner part of you was always a builder, right? That's why you're like when as I assume you did really well, and now you're focusing on contributing to this incredible ecosystem that we'll discuss in a few. Um, Also, just as a traditional practice, I throw this legal disclaimer so we cannot cut it out, right? Yes, this content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. So let's talk about your journey. I'm curious to hear about your personal journey first, right? I know you started since 2012, which is very early, right? So how did you first got this orange pill and what made you stay in the industry?
So I guess it really started pretty early on. My grandfather was a gold dealer and taught me about the value of scarcity and the gold standard when I was a kid. I built a bunch of tech startups when I was a teenager back in the early internet days. Everything from online publishing to doing investments inside of Second Life. If you remember that in 2005, 2006, that was my first exposure to digital currencies. So if you remember the Linden dollar,
Mm,
that was a really cool experiment. And I really saw sort of the evolution of an online game that had digital property and a virtual currency, but also the fact that it was a company sort of doomed to the experiment. Eventually, the regulators shut down all the cool stuff people were building in Second Life. Like people had created casinos and stock markets, and they were doing money transmission and all these incredible things. And the regulators like, no, 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 you can't do any of this, right? And so, in January 2007, when Second Life sort of got rid of all those interesting financial use cases, that was kind of the end of that particular journey. I kept building other tech companies. But then when I saw Bitcoin in 2012, I was like, oh, it's an unstoppable Linden dollar, right? There's no CEO. It's all open source. It's run by math. It's got a predictable supply. Yeah, I know exactly what people are going to do with this. They're going to do casinos and stock markets and money transmission and you name it, right? So I was very happy to turn my green pieces of paper into Bitcoin in 2012. And it wasn't easy back then. You're talking like Mount Gox and BitInstant and all these janky platforms that sort of half worked. And so, but yeah, I mean, transitioning to Bitcoin gave me some capital to work with. For the first time, I'd sort of been a scrappy engineer, founder, builder before that. But that let me move on to the capital side and, helped start BitAngels, the first angel group in the space back in 13, and then the first VC to do sort of a pure token thesis with the dApps fund in 2014. Yeah, and it sort of evolved from there, being able to help each project move up the tech stack from decentralized money to decentralizing smart contracts with Ethereum. I wrote the informational report around the token sale for ETH, and then as the second layers came out and other stuff. So it'd be fair to say I've sort of spent half and half my career on the engineering side and the other half of my career on the capital side. But yeah, the bureaucracy of public companies, sort of you get higher up on the capital side, it's kind of grating, and so it's been refreshing the last few years just to go back to the engineering side and spend all my time building open source permissionless technology. And so that's what I've been focused on the last couple of years is Morpheus and this whole decentralized AI wave.
I remember people also know you through the Decentralized application because you coined the term. Can you also elaborate a little bit on how did it happen? What inspired you?
So I was thinking a lot in the early days about what made Bitcoin so successful. And I effectively boiled it down to four things, right? It had to be open source, it had to be peer-to-peer, it was built on a blockchain, and it had its own token, right? The software had a way to pay for its own hardware. Right? That was the real genius of Satoshi, because that gave you uh, persistence, right? The network wasn't going to go away. There was a reward, there was an incentive for people to provide mining hardware, right, to continue operating the network over time. And so I said, why can't we generalize this approach and use it for other types of utility, right? So
Mhm.
when Vitalik started putting out the proposals for a generalized scripting on Bitcoin, because that was his initial idea, is like, yeah, this is a great candidate for that. People were talking about digital assets, helped a bit with the Mastercoin Foundation, which was the first ones to put digital assets on top of Bitcoin. Famously, that's where Tether, USDT got its start. And so that was sort of the concept. Those four things constituted a decentralized application. If you were a real dApp, you had to be open source, peer to peer, have a blockchain, and have your own token. And that was a bit controversial at the time because people sort of had this concept that could only be one coin, that could only be Bitcoin. But if I look across technology, that's not the case anywhere, right? Because Microsoft existed didn't mean you didn't need Google to build a network effect around search, or you didn't need Facebook to build a network effect around social, right? And so I believe network effects specialize around different verticals, right? You can see that across technology. And so I said, well, the same thing's going to happen in crypto, right? Bitcoin is optimized for digital gold, and that's great. It does what it does, but it's not going to be a smart contracting platform, right? Certainly not back in 2014. And so having a group like Ethereum emerge and provide smart contracts makes a lot of sense, right? So with that framework and sort of offering that to everybody, and that was adopted by the Ethereum community. If you look at the original paper, Ethereum is a platform for smart contracts and decentralized applications, right? So there's sort of different terms floating around, but after Ethereum adopted sort of the term I had coined and I had put out that white paper and framework, that sort of just took off and has a life of its own. And people would come back to me with cool ideas and proposals for improving it or the next thing to include. But it's putting me in an interesting position to kind of receive a lot of the ideas and proposals as people try to improve the technology up the tech stack.
But what was impressive, I just want to also note that you created the decentralized application fund in 2014-15. That was prior to Ethereum, right? So I just want to note this, like for some people who don't know this, like fun fact.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the,
it was basically just building a fund based on the thesis of the paper.
yeah.
So it was the self-fulfilling prophecy is like, well, if dApps are going to exist, people are going to want to fund them. And so a bunch of people in the early Mastercoin and BitAngels community tossed in some money to the limited partnership and
Mhm.
started supporting those early projects. And it gave those projects importantly a proof point that somebody wanted this, somebody would fund it, right? Because there was a lot of debate early on. Ethereum itself, there was an internal debate initially at the project, right? Are we going to be open source? Are we going to be company? Are we going to do a token sale? Are we just going to raise 30 million from Google and be, a crypto company, right? But more centralized. Eventually, they decided to go full token open source foundation, and I think that was probably the best path. But yeah, I'm really proud that we sort of got to send that signal that that's what people want to see is move in that direction, and that ended up becoming that self-fulfilling prophecy.
No, that was like, the pioneer in experience. And then I remember you also were in Factom, right? You were a chairman and a board member, like, which was the first layer two protocol for Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yep.
Can you also share a few words about this project? I know, it was some challenging times. It was very early, like, right? And maybe a few words about this part.
So it was clear even in 2014, 2015, there would be scaling challenges with both Bitcoin. That didn't come to a head until 2017 with the block size wars. Or in the Ethereum case, right? Blocks didn't really fill up till 2018, 2019,
Mhm.
right? So Factom was way ahead of its time. Credit to sort of the genius engineer Paul Snow that created sort of a beautiful scaling system where it would take all the transactions, it would create this Merkle tree, it would take the root, it's a little hash, 32 bytes, and drop that into a Bitcoin transaction, drop that into an Ethereum transaction. And so where you were rooting the security in these huge layer ones, but you could extend that security upwards to a much larger number of transactions. So
Mhm.
it was a really amazing project. But yeah, that's it before we even had a term for layer twos, right? We were just talking about, scaling blockchains. But yeah, I believe that's branded as Accumulate is the
Mhm.
current brand, but the network continues operating and is fully decentralized at this point and sort of proved out the technology. But yeah, maybe 5 years before people really appreciated what was being built and why it was so critical. So
I would even say much earlier than that. But if you think about it, like we actually the trend of talking about the Bitcoin layer two emerged probably like last year, like I would say into the full extent that we're now having a lot of marketing dollars, a lot of like VCs looking into it, right? So probably 9 years ahead of your time.
yeah, yeah, and 9 years ahead on Bitcoin and 5 or 6 years ahead on Ethereum.
Yeah. And
you
are you
know,
in touch with Paul still? Do you know what he's doing now?
I see him at conferences and stuff like that. He's a
Mm.
good guy. He's here based in Austin, and so
Oh,
I'm in
also got
Austin
it.
these days. So yeah.
So after that, I know that you were a partner in Yemen, right? So you started to invest in early stage projects. So like, what was this like? How did you find like? And I know that it was like one of the first Web3 venture studios, right? And the private equity firm. So it's not like a traditional VC firm, right? So can you explain us how did you start it? Who were your partners, and what was unique about it?
Sure. So Mark and Gavin and Henry and I started Yeoman's Capital. Initially, it came out of a family office that I had started and sort of evolved into a venture studio. And as far as I know, it was probably one of the first venture studios. I want to say this is back in 17, 18, 19
Yep.
type of time frame. And, you know, um, there was just a lot of, let's say, clarity that there was amazing things that could be done at the engineering level. And how do you translate that into letting companies use it, into letting enterprises use it, into letting, these bigger institutions get access, right? And maybe I believe this is around the same time, but you started to see things like the Ethereum enterprise, alliance emerge and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, okay, the technology is evolving, it's scaling, it's going more mainstream, you know, and so provided capital into that to really sort of accelerate as much as I could, more mainstream adoption, and so you know Henry went on the road and spoke at the conferences and I worked with on the capital side, and Mark was our guy doing operations, and Gavin was the enterprise whisperer, and did an amazing job with that. He's done a bunch of cool projects since then, and that was a cool time because this was pre-COVID, so right, this is like 17 to 19. You're going around the world, sort of almost evangelizing this idea that crypto is going to go mainstream. It's going to become one of those tools. And so, yeah, but ended up focusing on different aspects. The guys spun out and focused on sort of a lot of the data plays, and I was more interested in more of the decentralized projects. And then COVID hit, right? So, kind of refocused in 2020 and said, where can I get closer to the infrastructure? And ended up spending a lot of time on Bitcoin mining and projects in Texas because the Chinese in 19 had been kicked out of China for Bitcoin mining, right?
Mm.
It was clear the cheap power was in Texas, and so you had great groups like Rhodium and others that emerged in the Austin area using extremely cheap power in sort of all of this infrastructure that was left over from Alcoa and other major power consumers that had moved out. The Bitcoin miners started to move in. So that was a really interesting period. 2021 spent a
Hmm.
lot of time on infrastructure, and that's sort of when we got to the cycle where people were like, oh, we can take these companies public, right? Unfortunately, we hit a lot of headwinds with the SEC and the regulators, like not exactly friendly the last 4 years from 20 to 24. And so there was a lot of challenges there, but definitely sort of pushed the envelope on the Bitcoin mining into liquid immersion and all these new technologies, sort of pushing the envelope further, and then ended up spending a lot of time in Filecoin. So really passionate about decentralized data storage, and
Mm.
there's a whole play around that. And you can and think of it as an analogy to Bitcoin mining, but you're providing storage, right? And so went to Europe, took a project public there. The regulators didn't like that either, unfortunately,
Oh, which
and so
country?
Norway. Norway,
Norway.
Norway,
Interesting.
because they had been added to Euronext, the European exchange,
Yep.
and so it was an interesting way to come out. And they were saying that they were very friendly to Web3 until all of a sudden they decided in 23 they didn't want Web3 and it didn't fit any of their standards. And so we ended up having to spin the company out and got acquired. But like, yeah, I mean that was sort of, you know, the the heavy friction, heavy, bureaucracy, running a public company, like try to even do a press release, like, oh, we'll need a month for the lawyers to review this. And it's like, how does anybody get anything done? Especially coming from an entrepreneurial background where you're be used to building tech startups, right? And so it's been really refreshing. I decided in early 23 after that experience, just like I want to go back to open source and building decentralized systems and permissionless aspects where you can just ship and you can talk openly about anything you're doing because it's all
Mm.
built in public. And yeah, that's been really, really great, right? And has been very rewarding, especially because this whole wave, and that ended up being really good timing, where this whole wave of AI and then decentralized AI, and now people are realizing agents.
Yeah.
And I had written a paper in early 23 about smart agents. Like, okay, guys, inevitably AIs are going to start using smart contracts. Let's give a word to that. Let's talk about this intersection where an AI can use a wallet, what permissions you need from the user, how does the user express intent, how does the large language model understand that. So I ended up spending a lot of time working in that area. And then in September of 23, I saw the Morpheus paper. I was like, ah, yes, this is the missing piece because I had been mostly focused on the local context, right? People
Mhm.
installing the LLM on their own machine, right? And that was really cool. But the truth is, if you look at Bitcoin and Ethereum, very few people want to run a full node. Like you're talking 10, 20,000 people in the world. Like anybody can run a Bitcoin full node. It's a lot of hassle. And
Yeah.
most people just won't do it, right? And so if you want a decentralized AI, to break out of that like little niche of hobbyists like me that'll run it locally, you needed it in a network context where it could be running on GPU anywhere and work on a distributed network. And that's sort of what the paper suggested. And I also really liked the other aspect of the paper was the fair launch. This
Mm.
idea that there should be no company, there should be no token sale, there should be no foundation. Just do a fair launch. Let people stake Ethereum, contribute to that to bootstrap the protocol into protocol and liquidity. I thought that was very elegant and sort of very clean in creating a neutral platform that wasn't owned by any particular blockchain or any particular company. There was no founder, right? The authors dropped this paper and then sort of disappeared. And the timing ended up being really, really good because in October of 23, that's when the restrictions started to come in from the executive order in the US, the EU AI Act, the Chinese were passing a bunch of restrictions. Like it was very clear they did not like open source AI and they were going to try to really restrict it. And so that really, and that really pulled out this huge reaction from the open source community. It's like, what do you mean you guys are banning math? Like you understand these models are just a database of math, right? And like, no, we're not going to ban math, and that's not going to cause good outcomes. So, it was sort of really amazing to see that reaction and sort of counter reaction to the restrictions was people really calling for more open source. And so, yeah.
First of all, I find it very ironic that every time in your journey you're like you're ahead of your like time, right? So like you like for like in a Norway context also like when we met in Davos, like you remember one of the representative of Norway's sovereign wealth fund now are talking about, oh, shall we invest 1% or 5% into Bitcoin, right? Whereas 5 to 6 years ago, there was like, are you crazy? We will never invest directly. It's impossible, etc. Right? So we're seeing this like incredible progress in narratives and like who would have imagined that like now the president of the United States would launch his meme coin and then like now that one of the most like uh open-minded governments like creating like their own fund like strategic fund where Bitcoin is going to be the strategic reserve and places like Texas is booming having more and more miners coming in, right? So but of course, like we're probably going to skip your time because we're not going to have like maybe a few more hours to talk about your time, like multi-coin and then space fun, right? But I just want to mention that your career is tremendous. Like like I know that you deployed to hundreds of projects and you contributed a lot into open source, like community. But I really want to spend at least like a good half an hour to talk about Morpheus, right? So. First of all, like let's remind people like what Morpheus is, right? Because I think it's important that you define it in the right way, like so because you obviously you can go Morpheus.network and learn by yourself like what it is, but we don't similar to what I see the similarities, right? There is no founding, like we don't know exact founders, like three anonymous contributors who just released the white paper. You were one of the few to find this white paper and start working on it. So maybe you can tell us the story. How did you find it, and what made you excited about it?
So, yeah, and like you said, anybody can go to mor.org and more.org and read a lot. And there's the GitHub and the open source and everything on there, sending and saying, hey, here's a white paper about smart agents, and we think, it belongs in this network context, and good luck, right? And so, you know, I'm used to that kind of thing because I've worked with a lot of anonymous contributors over the years. A lot of the early Bitcoin guys were anonymous. A lot of the early Mastercoin developers I've still never met in person and don't know their name, but they wrote good code, and like it's like okay, so there's sort of a that's expected in crypto. And you look historically, people use pen names for lots of different reasons. Maybe they're in a jurisdiction where they're not allowed to do that kind of development, right? Or they don't want to risk their day job or whatever it is, right? But they think it's important enough that they want the technology to exist, right? I think people have forgotten, even like recently with zero knowledge proofs, right? Who released those papers, right? They were anons, right? Nobody claims the zero knowledge proof paper, and that was only what 2016, 2017, whenever that was what led to eventually Zcash and then the implementation of all the zero knowledge proofs. That was a character from Harry Potter claimed that invention, right? So there's a lot of this in crypto, but I like that because it means that the project is owned by the community. It's sort of like this: we are all Satoshi. It's
Mm.
like we're all Morpheus, and it's whatever we make it. Like, and people will often come into the community and be like, hey, can I get permission for XYZ? And they're like, go for it. Like, nobody could stop you if they wanted to. Like, there's no, even the name Morpheus, because it's an ancient Greek god, is in the public domain, right? So there's no copyright. Like somebody in the community just made this fan art of Morpheus and it became one of the logos, right? A guy in Ukraine made some t-shirts and shipped them around to the conferences and donated them to the different code contributors. Like, it's just sort of, it gave people license. Like in the early days of Bitcoin, you could make your own Bitcoin t-shirt. There was no
Hmm.
Bitcoin company selling Bitcoin t-shirts, but that was sort of the flavor that you love, is it lets people use their own creativity. And I actually think it's a lot more powerful than a centralized narrative controlled by a chief marketing officer. And, if there's a marketing department, like, people don't tell people about it. Oh, they'll see the ad or whatever. But like, people told their friends and family about Bitcoin because they thought it really mattered and they wanted honest money and they thought the existing system was corrupt, right? And that's the vibes I'm getting again that I really haven't had since like the days of Bitcoin and Ethereum, is like, this really matters. We need a human centric AI system. That's what Morpheus is building. We can be part of that. It's all open source. It's free. Here you go. Let me help you download it. Let me help you, get Venice.ai. Let me help you get a personal agent that's yours, right? It's your data, it's your wallet. I mean, that's the heart of this, is how do we put humans at the center? And so if I were to describe Morpheus in a very short way, I really draw the analogy to Ethereum, right? What
Hmm.
Ethereum did for smart contracts, Morpheus is doing for smart agents. And what did Ethereum really do? It provided, say, four pieces of infrastructure, right? You needed the EVM, you needed the consensus mechanism, you needed solidity, right? You needed all these building blocks, right? All the Ethereum improvement proposals, right? All the ERCs, like, that's the heart of Ethereum. They didn't go build a bunch of the end applications, right? They let the community build anything they wanted, right? And that was very different than the other projects. Most of the other projects tried to centralize all the development in a foundation, or, with a few founders, but Ethereum was very open and sort of welcoming of anybody building on it, right? And so Morpheus has a very similar culture, right? Where this concept of a smart agent, I think agents going to end up doing the vast majority of transactions in the economy. Okay, then I really want an agent that reflects my values, my interests, is a fiduciary to me,
Hmm.
not some big company or government, right? That's the core concept. And once people get that, like, yeah, that's what I want. If AI is going to be 99% of the intelligence of the future, I want it to be a reflection of me, not somebody else, right? I want my own personal AI to interact on my behalf with others. So I'm actually writing an article about this right now. This idea of what I really need is a super agent, right?
Hmm.
One that represents me and acts on my behalf with other third party agents, right? And so, yeah, that's sort of the core concept, and that just sort of caught fire with people, and the word spread. And by the time the fair launch rolled around in February, you had hundreds of millions of dollars of staked ETH show up and stake towards the project. And there was no PR, there was no marketing, there's no company. It had just sort of spread organically. And people were like, yeah, this needs to exist. We're going to support it. I'm going to hold the Ethereum anyway. I might as well stake it towards a cool open source project. And that's sort of the genesis.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions about it. So yes, we are talking about the first peer-to-peer network for general purpose AI, powered by More. And so far, from what I've seen, like the contracts are deployed on Ethereum, Arbitrum, and Base, right?
Correct.
Also, maybe you can elaborate why these networks, was there a voting mechanism for the community to actually like decide which contracts, and what is the plan on, deploying on other chains?
So fundamentally, Morpheus is chain agnostic, right?
Mhm.
I see there's a repo right now where people have developed a version of the smart contract that can be deployed on Solana. So
Mhm.
that's going into audits right now. So I wouldn't be surprised in 2 or 3 weeks we'll see more on Solana as a token via Layer Zero or via Wormhole, are both integrated into Morpheus. Um, but there's no voting concept in Morpheus. Really, in Morpheus, governance is more like a marketplace because everything in Morpheus is modular. You don't need to force people into a default. They can pick any agent, any model, any version of the software that they want, right? So it's not a layer one, it's a set of smart contracts. You have a lot of flexibility
Mm,
in modularity. So, you know, votes tend to give you the lowest common denominator. As opposed to a marketplace, you can let a bunch of ideas experiment and the best ones will rise to the top, right? And there might be different bests for different people in different contexts. And if you have a modular approach, that's okay, right? And so Morpheus has pioneered this concept of atomic governance, which says that each repo maintainer, like I'm the maintainer for the smart contracts repo, and Ryan Condron does it for the compute router, and Rakshak Talwar is the maintainer for the smart agents repo, right? There's like 10 15, now like 20 plus repositories in Morpheus, and they're all maintained by different experts that basically put in the most work in that particular subject. Like they're the expert. Like Ryan spent 5 years on routing systems for hash rate, now AI. Like he's clearly the guy you want making decisions for that architecture, not a community vote, right? And to insert all that friction of, oh, we're going to wait 90 days to see if the community is like, no, Ryan's the expert. Like let him build, and because it's all modular, if you don't like it, don't use it. Right? You can just use the other one. You can fork it. You can make an alternative. Like there's no pressure to create a default on one thing. And so, while anybody can be a maintainer, it turns out it's a lot of work. And so there's
yeah.
only a few dozen people who have volunteered to be maintainers, while there's hundreds of people, I think 300 plus now, that have contributed code. So most people just want to make an improvement or ship some code and help the project contribute to the open source. Um, but that's something worth double clicking on. I haven't seen a project since Ethereum that has taken so seriously the idea of rewarding developers, right?
Mm,
Everybody remembers the ICO from Ethereum. Everybody remembers, the GPU miners. What they forget is Vitalik airdropped ETH to every single engineer who showed up or commented on GitHub or did anything really. We're talking hundreds of people from
yeah.
when the white paper was announced till the Genesis block. Like he was very egalitarian. He did not try to concentrate the rewards. And in fact, a lot of people criticize him. Why are you giving away all these ETH to these random developers? But those are the people that ended up building on Ethereum, right? People ask me why Ethereum has all the devs, because they rewarded all the devs. Like that set the initial network effect of people that had the ETH and wanted to build on Ethereum. And so Morpheus has been very similar. 24% of all the rewards go to coders providing the reference implementations, right? So across
Mhm.
all those repositories, and 24% go to the agent builders, creating agents and projects and protocols and applications on top of Morpheus, right? So third party devs also get 24% of the rewards, right? The other 24% go to compute, the other 24% goes to the capital providers in the never ending fair launch. And there's 4% left over for a protection fund for audits. But like that is very unusual. Like almost all protocols are like, we're proof of stake, and almost all the rewards are going to people with money, or we're proof of work, and almost all the rewards are going to the people with the computers. And usually the forgotten group are the people writing the code,
Yeah.
right? The actual developers. And so I really like the balance in Morpheus between those different types of contributors.
No, I think that's truly unique. 100% agree with you. What I would love to also elaborate a little bit, because you mentioned something very also impressive. This is the concept of never-ending fair launch. And I do believe it worthwhile, like at least like 2 minutes, so that like, help us to like shed some more light to it. What does it really
So
mean?
in most projects, there's a token sale, and maybe it lasts 90 days. Unfortunately, a lot of projects, pre-sell to some VCs, and it's not a very healthy model, right? People don't feel good about, oh, a VC got it cheap and now you want me to buy it expensive. Like people are over that model. There's not a lot of appetite for those type of projects anymore. And so the Morpheus approach is almost the opposite. It's like 24% of all the rewards, the entire supply curve, like the entire 16 years of the initial epoch, like they're all going to anybody who shows up, stakes their Ethereum, and provides the yield. And that competition is going every second of every day. So let's say there's $100 million of Ethereum staked, and you stake $1 million of staked Ethereum, of Lido staked ETH.
Hmm.
Great. You're going to get 1% of the rewards that day. 1% of the more token emissions that are coming out, right? I think right now to the capital emissions, it's like 3,250 more are emitted each day, right? And there's a decay rate. It's going down over time until you get zero, in year 16 of the protocol, right? And so that's really interesting because you didn't miss out. Like if you're hearing about Morpheus right now, you can still earn more tokens. I haven't done the math lately, but it's like for like $8 to $10 worth of yield. That's your effective price, right? Of what you're contributing via the yield instead of taking it yourself, you're directing it towards the protocol, right? And that competition keeps going, right? So as the price of Morpheus has gone up, it's created more competition where people are more willing to provide staked Ethereum and also provide it for longer. So now there's a power curve, and if you lock up your Morpheus rewards for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it's giving you a higher proportion of the rewards. So there's a time competition involved, and I think the average staking of rewards is now almost 3 years for capital contributors. It's almost 4 years for code contributors. So like the diamond hands on this community are like there's a lot of early crypto people that like, man, I wish I had never sold my Bitcoin. And now they're like, yeah, I'm locking this stuff up for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. I think I locked a bunch of my rewards to like 2030 or 2034, or some of them to like 2040. So
Wow.
it's like, I wish I could have done that with my Bitcoin. Like I'm gonna do that with some of my Morpheus. And it's like I'm a long-term guy. I mean, you give me a little too much credit earlier saying I've supported hundreds of projects. It's actually been probably only a few dozen and really focused on
Only a few dozen.
five or yeah, but I've really focused on 5 or 10 and really three, right? I almost spent 5 years on Bitcoin, 5 years in Ethereum land, and here I'm a year or two into Morpheus because most of the value, if you look at the outcomes, has accrued to the largest network effect in a particular vertical, right? Digital gold for Bitcoin, smart contracts for Ethereum. And my thesis right now is smart agents for Morpheus, right? Whatever gets built on top, it's likely that most of the value will accrue to the protocol layer, and that means Morpheus, right? And so, yeah, I really like that tokenomic model, right? For anybody that hasn't read the paper, 42 million is the hard cap
Yep.
for the amount of more that will ever exist, but it has a really clever mechanism because there's a burn involved in the protocol and liquidity as it buys tokens
Mhm.
out of Uniswap. It burns half of those, and the other half get locked for 16 years from now. So you think about the effect of that. In Bitcoin, you have certainty of the hard cap, but nobody knows how the block ward is going to get figured out. But that's 100 years from now, right? And if you kind of wave away the problem. Or Ethereum, you don't have certainty about the hard cap, but there's a burn mechanism and it's making emissions less over time. Okay. But Morpheus sort of has is a really unique solution. It has both a hard cap, and because half of it is burned and half of it returns as the block reward for the next 16 years, you can know there's a hard cap, but you'll never run out of block rewards. And so you look at the curve in the white paper, it's projected out for 256 years, right? Like they're going to be, effectively perpetual block rewards because you're returning some of the burn, but you never compromise on scarcity. It's never going to break the 42 million because you're burning half of the protocol and liquidity. So it's something less than 42 million, but you've got some coming back as the block reward. So it's a really elegant solution.
It is elegant and in many ways pretty unique. Is there like obviously Morpheus has a very deeper meaning, I assume, like with also like Matrix movie, like and the God, like you mentioned, like so there's a combination. But 42 million, is there a particular reason? Do you know why this number or just happened?
They did the Anons didn't say in the white paper the reason. I presume it's a reference to life, the universe, and everything. The 42 is the summation.
42. Okay, so that
Yeah. That's my presumption. It's also 2x 21 million. So if you think about
yeah,
Bitcoin's
that was my presumption actually. Like so
yeah. So whether it's a joke on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or whether it's 2x the Bitcoin golden number, it's a bit arbitrary, but they didn't say the reason for the 42 million. But if you look at the numbers, it was sort of elegant because it started at 14,400 total emissions, and if you ran
Mhm.
out the number of days, it's just shy of 16 years with the decay rate to get to zero. So, you know, that's a good question for the Anons, but I don't know. I took it as a universe, life, the universe, and everything. The answer is 42, right?
That
But
that is actually a beautiful analogy. I love it. So far as I understand, it's like it's very open source. You don't have any market making work in it. Considering like as if I'm gonna wear a little bit my of a capitalist hat, and yeah, I would say that like it was launched, it was launched on the 606 2024, like so June 2024, and the price was $70. Right now it's 23, so it's about six, like we're talking about like we are now in February 2025, so it went down a little bit, 66%. But you're still very bullish in it because more and more coders, more and more contributors are coming in. So it's not a, you're not worried about the speculative nature of like the token itself because you believe in a long run, right?
well, and if you look at the Explore tab on more.org and
Mhm.
more.org, you'll see the entire price history. So unfortunately, a lot of the chart websites only sort of capture whenever they start recording the data. But Morpheus started at zero, and then you could get it for a buck, and then you could get it for two, and then you could get it for five, and then you could get it for 10. And I think 5 to 10 is about the average that people have sort of paid via implied cost of yield to the
Mhm.
project. So I do find it funny, like, going from like $5 to $25. It's like, darn, it's only up 500% in a year. It's like only in crypto where like people have that type of perspective. And sure, when the tokens went live, yeah, the initial trading sort of was all over the place and it settled in around 70, even made it up more than 100, and then settled eventually down into like a 20 to 30
Mhm.
trading range.
Yes.
Um, but if you think about it, and I think about this, one, I'm not day trading. Like I'm buying, I'm holding, I haven't sold a single more. Right. So like my goal is, and I've did this with Bitcoin, I did this with Ethereum, like my minimum time frames are like 5 years, right? So like, I'm here to build a really large, interesting project over time. And if you think about the distribution of emissions, the key ought to be how many people can you get access to the token in those formative first couple years, right? You don't want it to be single digits or a couple dozen people or a couple hundred people. You want it to be thousands and thousands of people to be able to build a position, between that initial dollar and, $20, $30, $100. And so, you know, if you look at the market cap instead of looking at the price, it keeps chunking up, right?
Hmm.
So back in October, it was a $20 million project. And then in November, it was a $40 million project. And by December, it was a $60 million project. And by January, it was a $80 million project, right? And it just popped over 100 million recently, and it's floating around 80 million right now. So if you think about it from that perspective, the amount of value that's flowing into Morpheus from capital contributors, code contributors, compute contributors, and now builders is apparently equivalent to about $20 million a month.
Hmm.
And if you think about it from a tokenomic perspective, the decay rate goes down every day. Right? Morpheus is becoming ever more scarce, right? People are locking up most of the emissions that they're earning for capital or code in these, 3, 4, 5 year lock times, right? So Morpheus is becoming ever more scarce and more value is clearly flowing in and building the market cap over time. And so I think that's actually a good metric to look at as much as individual token price is to see the value. Because if you look at the total market cap, those are the resources available to build decentralized AI. And that's the thing here. Again, go back to the outcome is you want Morpheus to have the largest network effect for smart agents,
Hmm.
right? And to clear something up, a lot of people ask me, oh, is Morpheus competing with Akash or BitTense or Venice?
Yeah.
No, like Morpheus is creating demand for those projects, right? It's creating demand for those GPUs. It's creating demand for that compute. It's creating demand for BitTensor's, models that they train. Like Morpheus is complementary, right, in the fact that it's providing all of this infrastructure and it's neutral. There's no pre-mine. There's like you are Morpheus. Like, and so all of those projects have shown up to these decentralized AI days and summits that the community has held because they're all benefiting from the demand that's created. So take the recent example of Venice, right? They're the most popular builder subnet on Morpheus, right? They've got 70,000 plus more staked to them. They did this huge airdrop to the community and people are realizing, oh, wow, if I want to bootstrap my project, here's a concentrated group of people that really care about decentralized AI, are going to host all these events, are building all the infrastructure, and will help me succeed. So that's what we're really seeing.
Yeah, that is impressive. So far, just to summarize, there are four major ways how you can interact with Morpheus, right? You can deploy capital as an individual or a group, right? And you can basically like earn yield together, like, with in the form of more, right? You can you can actually like code, right? Deploy the code and you will be compensated in more, right? You can also provide compute or you can build on top of it, right? So maybe I think like you covered really deeply like the first two options like but when it comes to compute and builders if you can also explain a little bit well how can people participate in like in those like when you say for example create a subnet what does it actually mean in simplified language?
Sure. So on the compute side, it's really groups like Akash, SETI, Hyperbolic, Genosend. There's a bunch of groups that focus on providing AI models, running them, and getting compensated for that. And so Morpheus has a decentralized router for compute, right? Morpheus is not providing any GPUs, it's not competing with these groups, it's just giving them that infrastructure layer where they can connect users with their supply of GPUs, their supply of models. So that's a really sort of interesting piece. And so a lot of this you can think Morpheus is this aggregation layer.
Hmm.
Somebody jokingly called it 1 inch for AI compute, and I thought that was kind of clever. Like if you're familiar with 1 inch, they'll route your trade across a bunch of different dexes. They're not a dex themselves, they're a
Yes.
routing layer, right? And so that's actually a good way of thinking about Morpheus is this routing and aggregation layer that's connecting together demand and supply, right? Another way would be to say a marketplace, right?
Hmm.
Um, the same is true, like we're talking for builders, right? There's an agent registry. There's a place you can register your subnet. Really just means, hey, I'm a builder in this community. If you stake some Morpheus to me, and the protocol is going to send me emissions, I'll give you a reward. I'll give you an airdrop. I'll give you an NFT. I'll give you a pro account. I'll give you access to an API. I'll give you early access to a cool new product. Like anything people can imagine qualifies as a builder. There's not a strict definition. In the white paper, it described it as front ends, applications, sort of anything user facing that people want to support. And again, you don't need votes and you don't have to convince 51% of people. Whatever proportion of the Morpheus holders staked towards you, that's your proportion of the rewards, right? So if there's 100,000 Morpheus being staked and 10,000 of those are being staked towards your subnet, congratulations. You get 10% of that reward portion. If you want to go through the exact calculations, I released a whole article on agent builders on X, and it runs through like the exact math of how the emissions work, but sort of at a high level, like I think you can get the concept, right? It's not bound by votes, it's bound by individuals individually deciding where to direct those rewards.
Now, if we're just gonna like look at it as an opportunity for not only decentralized applications, but maybe some of the centralized applications who want to be like a hybrid model, how do you see they can interact with Morpheus?
Well, I mean, the API is a great way, or, interact with something like Venice, right? They have a beautiful API, and they have really been one of the leaders sort of testing the integration of the Morpheus router and stuff like that. So ultimately, sort of demand that comes through these community APIs can flow onto the router, onto the aggregation layer. So that's probably an easy way to start.
Got it. Um, just side note, how much time do you have?
I've got a few minutes. I can send a message to my next meeting, let them know still talking.
Okay. Yeah, because we can talk about Morpheus a lot, like, and I would love to people to learn more as you mentioned, more.org, they can start like their journey, and there's a lot of like research papers, and we're gonna include into the description of this interview. Um, Probably we'll leave some of the aspects as enigma and collect more questions for hopefully for the next interview, right? I want to ask you like also two personal questions, right? And if I may, like I know that there's also the personal side of you that not many people know, right? Not so I want to ask you, how many kids do you have?
Well, I've got four biological children, and I have an adoptive daughter, and I've got a couple of exchange students right now. So, seven kids in the house altogether. Yeah, I'm a big family guy. I'm a big believer in creating life, and I'm a space nerd, so I'm planning to colonize space. You gotta, have a big family, and some of them will probably want to come. So, I've accepted that not all my kids may want to go to Mars with me, but some of them will probably want to go on the journey. So yeah, it's something important to my wife and I, and here in Austin, Texas, you can have a six-bedroom home for 3,000 a month, and that's that's like a very affordable life for the average engineer, and that's part of why it keeps winning, right? It keeps pulling people in like gravity. It's just the math of where can you be treated best. So yeah, that's definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, that first of all, that's beautiful. And then there's one question which I never notify my guests, but I want to ask you also this, like, so I'm sure what you're doing, there's a deeper meaning into it, right? So what is the meaning of life to you, David?
You know, um, I'm deeply religious, so for me, it has a lot to do with my faith. It has a lot to do with my family. I think we're called to create life. I think we're called to, spread out existence, right? I think people are good, right? I think it's something worth propagating. I think too many people have gotten this mind virus that, people are bad and destroying things, and I don't believe that at all. I think people are fundamentally important and valuable, and it's worth expanding humanity, right, beyond the earth. And you know, I think people have these 1970s concepts of scarcity that we're brushing up against the max of the planet, and like I run the numbers, we're not even close, right? So, like I think flipping that on its head and saying like having creating life and expanding life is extremely important. Though a lot of my life journey has been how do you do that in the best way? And my reading of history and of economics is the more freedom and property rights, the more prosperity you get, right? And that ends up with the best outcomes for like quality of life, life expectancy. All these things are correlated to prosperity, like economic prosperity. And you could look across history. It's not a mystery, like it's not an opinion. If you have stronger property rights and fundamental human rights and freedoms, you have much better outcomes
Yeah.
over time. And we can push that needle, right? People often fantasize about, oh, if I could go back in time and change XYZ, it would have a big effect. But they don't realize they're in that moment right now. And just a small nudge, you can affect the future in a really big way, right? Just writing that paper on dApps or, nudging the needle on, tokenization and Ethereum and stuff like that. Like those ended up being like they were just small nudges and it wasn't a lot of money, but it had a huge effect over time, right? And so that's my vision is we have to move away from systems of violence because that's effectively how the state operates, right? As a monopoly on violence in the courts and into systems of mathematics that are peaceful and neutral and automated and just work so much better than these old systems. So if you think about civilization as a whole, I want to move as much as we can towards these math-based systems and away from violence-based systems. So if I can achieve that and push the needle a little bit, but we're making great progress, right? We
Mhm.
not only have decentralized money, now we have decentralized smart contracts. Now we're getting decentralized smart agents. Like we're making it further and further up the tech stack. And there are $3 trillion of assets that have moved in to the blockchain property rights system, right? That are held by a private key, not the point of a gun. And the court can make you do XYZ. Like that's a big improvement, but we still got a long ways to go, right? There are $300-400 trillion in assets, not including derivatives and all the exotic stuff. And so we're like 1% of the way. But in an exponential function, 1% of the way is halfway there. Like it doesn't take that many more doublings to go to 2, 4, 8, 16,
Mhm.
32, 64. Oh, in 5 or 6 years, we're at the majority of the world economy. So this is going to really start to move fast, faster than people expect. It's the old slowly and then suddenly.
Yes. I love your perspective. Seriously, like I've learned so much from you, and I love that it's very positive. I love the fact that you're passionate about it, and yeah, I would love to somehow support the Morpheus ecosystem. I already have some ideas how we'll use the smart agents, so now I have to ask my product manager how we gonna deploy it. Yeah. So really thank you for your wisdom, David, and sincerely wish that whatever you're like, building, whatever you're contributing to the system, it's only gonna multiply, as you mentioned, in an exponential format. And yeah, thank you so much. Hope we're gonna do it again.
Absolutely. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, David.